Okay, so I'm here now talking about the last sections, the analysis and synthesis sections. Going to go through again, try to point out some general mistakes, so those will then mesh together with the specific things I've put in for comments, but give you an idea overall of some writing rules you should be trying to follow. The first comment on paper designated paper A is, and this goes for a lot of the papers I saw, we're dealing with a situation, we've got a rehash, retread, remix situation. Things that I know I read in the introduction, things that I know I read in the literature review are churning up again and again. Maybe it's partially symptomatic of the fact that on this assignment, on this project, I broke it into sections so everything seemed discrete. But remember, it's part of a larger project, so if you've explained something on page 1, you don't need to explain it again on page 3 and again on page 7. You can allude to things. Obviously, ideas are going to come up again and again, but you don't have to spell it all out in great detail each time you bring an idea in. Of course, if you wrote 3 different papers for 3 different classes, you would, but this is one paper for one class. Also, and this is an epidemic throughout all the papers, the this, that, these, those distinctions. Again, remember, think of it temporally. That thing I told you about, those things I told you about, this thing I'm about to tell you about, these things that I'm about to tell you about. It really matters. It makes it much easier for the reader. It's a cognitive thing. Every time I come across that and it's wrong, it just stops me dead. And I'm not the only one, so you need to pay attention to that. Paper B, big problem with a lot of papers, this one included, is lack of citations. Don't quite know why that is. Some people seem to almost get into and out of the habit. I'll find certain pages are well cited and then other pages are not, and I feel it's just a matter of maybe you get on a roll in your writing, and because you're writing easily, you're just spinning through it and not getting slowed down by the cites. But you have to remember, when you bring in a truth claim of some sort, something with specificity to it, you need a citation. Another problem with B and a lot of the other papers, walls of text, whole pages without paragraph breaks. Paragraphs are kind to your reader. They give your reader a chance to rest. Give people paragraphs, even if it's not strictly speaking required. If you have something that could technically legally remain a paragraph by the rules of writing, even so, it's not a bad thing necessarily to put a paragraph break in when you get to a page or longer. It is humane to the reader. People do expect to see them. Orphans, I've seen this in a few papers. I've entered comments, but just for those of you, if you didn't have a comment in there, make sure you never leave just a section name at the bottom of a page. Like, you know, analysis is the last thing on the page and then the analysis starts on the next page. Just jump it down so the top of the next page says analysis. Never orphan a section name at the bottom of a page without at least a line of text below it from the section itself. I've seen that 3 or 4 times so far, but I'm sure it's a mistake that others could make, that you just didn't happen to have a section name at the bottom of the page here. Paper C, for some reason, changed typeface. I specified Times New Roman. If you get a specification like that from your boss, from whoever you're working for, whatever the contract calls for, if you're an independent contractor, follow the rules. Don't just go, you know, off-roading and bring in a new typeface on the third piece of writing you've given me. You just have to learn to work the rule at some stage. Here I've got a note. Yeah, another common mistake is you've got to remember what the nature of the assignment is. You've got to compare the articles. That's what the analysis section is about. If you're going too far talking about one article and you don't have cites to other articles you're comparing, then you have to go back and do it again. The point of the analysis section is to mix it up. Always be changing the author you're talking about, and always be comparing A to B and B to C and A to C and C to A. That's the way you're supposed to work this section. It's not a long section, it's just a couple of pages, but you should be able to fit in at least 4 paragraphs that end up allowing you to compare each author to each other author in there. On D, again, it's important to remember that this assignment is part of a chain of assignments, so you can't be repeating things. Big ideas, small ideas. Once you've introduced it in earlier writing, you can really shorthand it in sections moving forward. E, again, I've seen this over and over. I've complained about it over and over. You've got to start listening to me at some point, all of you. Punctuation marks, commas, periods belong inside the quotation marks in America. Occasionally you could have a question mark outside or an exclamation point outside of a quote if you're ending an exclamatory sentence with a quote, but the quote itself wasn't an exclamation, you could, or the quote itself wasn't a question. Did she really say, "I'll see you there"? Right? The question mark will be outside the quotes, but otherwise they go inside the quotes. Another thing with E is echoing, and I've talked about this before, but here I've got a situation, I've got conclude and concluded in the same sentence unnecessarily, and show and showing right next to each other. It's unattractive in your writing. Garner again talks about inelegant variation, where people, particularly with nouns, try to mix things up just to make it interesting, and that can get clumsy too. It's a bit of a tightrope. At the very least, you need to be aware of it. You need to be making conscious decisions about the words you're choosing, not just the top of your mind, and then never go back and reread it and see what's going on. F, there's more than one way to restate things. In here, there were a lot of restatements of article names. Not necessary. You've introduced the article one time, then refer to it by the author name. Paper G. There were a few good opportunities in here that I thought more could have been done to bring them up in terms of profile. There's a point in here where the author talks about a few bad apples. The explanation for what happened at Abu Ghraib was a few bad apples. Missing the point that that's an explanation that's used frequently. You'll see it out there. It's been used a lot to explain where African Americans have been essentially murdered by police officers. A few bad apples, right? Don't condemn all cops because of a few bad apples. But the point I would make is that that phrase, although it gets bandied around a lot, the people who bandy it around seem to ignore the fact that the actual full phrase is a few bad apples spoil the whole barrel, or even one bad apple spoils the whole barrel. So that's relevant, I think. Don't miss opportunities. Also, there's a nice quote in here about constraints that news entities are under, where news entities tend to take it easy on the elites because they want their access maintained. Do more to bring that out. Don't squander opportunities in papers. Also be aware that different disciplines use different terms. You go through this all the time if you take upper level mathematics courses. You'll find, if you do methodology stuff in political science and so on, you'll find yourself sometimes going outside to other departments, right? I took courses from like resource economics, because they do a lot of fancy math stuff, for example. I took a panel data class there or something. And I took a time series course once, a long time ago, and it was blended with all different disciplines there. It wasn't just political science. And in math, a lot of times the notation changes, and that can be confusing. And then in the social sciences, we have different names for the same thing sometimes, and you have to be careful about that. Apparently in communications journals they talk about event-driven framing, but I've only seen episodic framing in political science. Up here, Youngar, he's the man on that stuff in political science, but he calls it episodic framing. That's why I was discouraging people from using non-political science journals, but sometimes something slips through. In any event, last one, I believe is H here. Sometimes it's confusing, and I think it's just something you have to catch in proofreading to the reader, whether you're restating what an article says or stating your point of view on something. Be careful when you're doing, when you're explaining what an article says. If you're not artful about it, it can come across that you've basically internalized the article and you're presenting it as fact. When in truth, I think what's happening is you're reporting what's going on in that article. So be cautious about that too. Those are my thoughts. I think that gets us all caught up on all the literature reviews, all of the introductions, the synthesis and analysis. You're going to start handing those in. Some have already come to me. I just finished editing one tonight. So there's the bulk of them will come in later today, and I'll get on those and get them right back to you as soon as I can. But most of the work is done. That's the happy news. I've got a few more videos coming at you about speech writing and the Gardner assignment, but those things are minor, low-stakes assignments that shouldn't give you too much trouble, and we'll go from there.